All right, well, welcome to the continuation of the Multicultural Inclusive Conference. We are continuing on our virtual sessions, and the session we have today is entitled Teaching with an Asset-Based Mindset, Mentoring Culturally Responsive Teaching Practices. We do have some community standards. I will link a PDF to the full version of these in the chat, but there are a few that I would like to go over here. Please obtain consent before you're taking any photos or screenshots or sharing any content that is the presenters today. We did have some folks attending last night that were doing this for class assignment, maybe writing reports. That's perfectly fine. Just please don't take photos of people or screenshots or share content that isn't yours. Please mute your microphone when you are not speaking. But when you are, if you could please turn your camera on and identify yourself. Please make sure to speak clearly and slowly. We are using a live closed captioning service, and we want to make sure that it's as accurate as possible. We are using the Zoom live closed captioning today. If you do not already see that on your screen, if you look at your Zoom taskbar and there is either a CC button or a More button, please click that and click the title that says View Live Transcript, and you should see it on your end. If you have any questions or concerns about that, please message one of the co-hosts in the chat. Most of our sessions will be recorded during MCIC. This is being done to make the sessions as accessible as possible for those who cannot attend live. The QR code that you see on your screen links directly to our Campus Climate YouTube page. Our recordings so far are being processed and professionally closed captioned, but if you want to take a moment and bring this up on your smartphone so you at least know where our YouTube page is located, I'll pause for a moment here and let you do that. Lastly, if you have questions at any time throughout this presentation, you can use the Zoom chat either publicly or privately. All of our co-hosts that you might see listed here today are able to address any questions you might have. And we will be monitoring our campus climate email address as well if you'd like to email us during the session or at any time. And finally, our session for today, Teaching with an Asset-Based Mindset, Mentoring Culturally Responsive Teaching Practices. This is being presented by Dr. Julia Cloat and Dr. Rocio del Castillo. Embracing an asset-based mindset is a crucial first step towards building a culturally responsive teaching practice and promoting equity. This session will provide participants with a greater understanding of the importance of having an asset-based mindset. The new Illinois Culturally Responsive Teaching and Leading Standards will be used to provide participants practical guidance as they build culturally responsive classrooms. And now I will turn things over to Julia and Rocio.
Thank you, Emily. And welcome everyone. Thank you for attending our session. As Emily said, this is Teaching with an Asset-Based Mindset. And I am Dr. Julia Stearns Cloat. I am Assistant Superintendent of the Freeport School District and also a professor at Northern Illinois University.
And hello, and my name is Rocio del Castillo, and I'm an Assistant Superintendent in Hampton School District 158. And I'm also a professor at NIU.
And we are so grateful that you chose to join us today. We want to start with this amazing quote from Zaretta Hammond. All instruction is culturally responsive. The question we're going to be asking for you to reflect on today is, to whose culture? So the reason why Rocio and I picked this quote to start with, we felt like it really presents the essence of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be asking each of you as educators to reflect on our own identities, on our own teaching and learning and assessing practices, and then thinking about approaching our pedagogy in a way that really embraces the assets of the cultures of our students, what they bring to our learning environments. And we're going to be talking through all of that, and along the way also defining some terms so we can have that collective understanding and conversation. So objective for today's sessions are to define key terms such as culture, asset-based mindset, and culturally responsive and culturally relevant teaching. We're also going to get into culturally sustaining pedagogy as well. We're also going to, I know the description said about the Illinois standards. While we work and teach in Illinois, we're going to take those standards and also embed them within the Wisconsin model to inform culturally responsive practices, so that you can see what we are thinking with that alignment and how the Illinois standards can help to inform the Wisconsin framework. And we're going to provide key strategies. We want you to walk away with something. So we're going to provide you with key strategies to incorporate those culturally responsive teaching and leading practices into your own experiences and as a teacher, a leader, administrator. So we first want to get to know who is in the room. So if you would please, when I say the role that you fill, would you please raise your hand, either your own hand or virtually if you choose not to have your hand up or your camera on right now. So if you are a teacher, would you please indicate that by raising your hand? If you are a student, please indicate that by raising your hand. A future educator. Okay, we've got a couple of future educators here. Thank you for joining us. An administrator. Okay. And other, if you are identifying your primary role is not one of those that I've already called out, would you mind either putting in the chat or unmuting and telling us what your current role is? I've got 3 people with their hands raised. So we have a disability specialist. And assistant director of student services, and assistant dean of students and marketing communications. Okay, welcome. Thank you so much. We're hoping we have a great diverse group today, so it's good to have that information. So Rocio is going to walk us through the why about asset-based approach.
Okay, so why? I think it's always important when we talk to educators or do we talk in a group that to start with the why. Why take an asset-based approach? Basically, if a teacher does not internally believe that a student is capable of learning at a high level, it's very unlikely that the teacher will instruct the student to that level. There's a lot of research about expectations for teachers, especially in our students of different groups. I don't like the word subgroups because it means like it's a little demeaning, but in different groups, right? In my work, I work especially with students, with bilingual students, with students with disabilities. So if you don't have high expectations for all the students, that's an issue in your instruction, right? So in the simplest terms, an asset-based approach focuses on the strengths. It views diversities in thought, in culture, and traits as positive assets. Teachers and students are valued for what they bring into the classroom and for what they have, not for what they do not have, right? An asset-based approach to teaching is one that is grounded in what the students can do rather than what they can not do. We have a term here in Illinois when we identify students with bilingual needs or for bilingual services, that LEP, limited English proficiency. What an awful term, right? Because instead of focusing on what they are bringing to the table, that we know so much about what multilingual or bilingual students are bringing to the table, we're focusing all our efforts in what are they lacking of? So we're still using that term when we report to the state, and every time we do the report, it's just like something that it's difficult for, I think, most of us. So that's it. So an asset-based approach is basically a growth mindset. That's how we do it in instruction, is how do we see and what's the next step for our students. When we're going to talk a lot about culturally responsive, culturally relevant, and culturally sustaining pedagogies. But when we talk about that, we forget that the word and the base word, it's culture. So we know that most educators in our country are white, middle-class, monolingual English speakers, but the same profile does not hold true for our students. Many educators try to bridge this difference with embrace color blindness or the golden rule, like treat everybody like you want to be treated. But the truth is color and culture matters. We can talk about the color blindness and for hours, but I want to call in my team, and I want to call myself that I'm not color blind, but I'm color brave, because color gives us information about our students too, right? It's part of our students' lives and experiences. So culture and culture matters. Culture isn't just a list of holidays or shared recipes, religious traditions. It's just a lived experience that is unique to each individual. Talking about culture, what's when, in the big picture definition about culture, what's culture? Culture has to do with our worldviews, right? Our beliefs, the language, our values. But culture at its essence are those filters that help us as human beings to make sense out of the most ordinary things. I always see culture as the lenses that I have to see the world and process the world. It's, again, as a shared system of meanings, beliefs, values, behaviors. It's learned, definitely is learned, it's collective, but it can also change over time. I were talking before with Kate and Emily about intersectionality and how it changed, right? I am a firm believer that I was a different person because I started this equity journey that I am now. And the culture and my values and my beliefs change over time, right? I was born in Peru. I came here 20 years ago, and I'm an English learner, and I'm a Latinx cisgender woman, and all this together, it make who I am now. And it was very different who I was when I was in Peru. So that change of culture over time and how we start processing our intersectionalities, I think it's important and interesting when we also approach our students. So when we're trying to see or explain a little about culture, we like Julie and I to use this whole iceberg model, right? Hall suggested that culture is similar to an iceberg, right? He proposed that there's two big components. One is just the 10% of the culture and is external or surface culture. It's very explicitly learned, it's conscious, it's easily changeable. It's very objective, it's objective knowledge, and it's easily visible. But the majority, the 90% of the culture is internal and is deep culture, is implicitly learned, it's unconscious, it's difficult to change, and it's kind of that subjective knowledge. It's below the surface. It's these aspects of cultures that include core values, priorities, beliefs, attitudes, assumptions, and perceptions are very difficult to observe, but probably the most important part of who we are. The model is a very simple representation of a complex system, right? It used the iceberg to illustrate that our experiences are deeply influenced by situations and experiences that we cannot easily see. The structures that form the framework within we operate and the beliefs we hold in how things work are mostly in the 90% of the things we cannot see. Okay, So now we're gonna do a little exercise. We have never done that via Zoom. It's always in person, but we're gonna try to do it today. So initially, when two people from different culture comes together, they can only see the above surface, right? If you see me, it's like, she's probably Mexican. I'm not, I'm Peruvian, but you can see she's Hispanic. She has an accent, so she's probably an English learner, but that's how I look, right? But you don't know exactly if my 90% will align to the way I see. What we do when we're in person, it's we say like, okay, let's look around the room and find a person that you think it's totally different from you. And people will ask us like, you mean race, you mean gender, you mean ethnicity, height, and we didn't give a lot of information. And then we analyze why they picked that person. In our case, it's going to be a little more like, it's going to be random, right? Because we are going to pair you with somebody. And what we want you to talk is that about this underneath the surface type of culture. The idea of discussing culture, particularly with people with different cultural backgrounds, can cause anxiety, right? Adopting an attitude of curiosity can go a long way. When people always say it's like, well, I don't know where you are from, I don't know what language are you, or the typical, where are you from? And I'm like, I'm from Crystal Lake, Illinois. No, where are you really from? So it's just the way you approach the situation, and just share the question with a sense of curiosity, is that those good and crucial conversations can happen, and those conversations would help build understanding between two different people from different backgrounds. And because culture is so unique to each person, it's like diversity within diversity, right? In other words, exceptions can and do apply. So just culture is very specific. So this is a long explanation for the next activity. We're gonna put you in breakout rooms of two people, and we want you to first discuss something that you have in common from that 10% of the iceberg that you can see that you have in common. And you don't need to have something in common, but then we want you to discuss the 90% of the iceberg and see what are some things that you cannot see, but that it can be similar or different from both of you. So you're going to get with another person, and then, there will be one group of three. Okay, perfect, Julia. So there will be one group of three, and then you can share that, your similarities of differences based on the framework of the iceberg model of whole. Any questions? That's a teacher in me, right? Any questions before dividing the group? And then when you come back, so I'll give you this processing time. When you come back, we will have 2 or 3 brave pairs or groups that will share with us really very fast the highlights of your conversation. Okay, so we're ready, Julia.
Okay, it looks like 2 people still need to go into breakout rooms, so I can add them to one of their own.
And you know what? I forget to say that it was going to be 5 minutes.
That's okay, we can announce it.
I just sent out a broadcast.
Thank you.
Rocio, is there anything else you wanted to broadcast? Just a reminder of what the task is or anything?
No, what about you?
So what would you say? How do you respond to this task, to this conversation?
You're asking me?
Yeah, or Emily or Kaden.
I've just had like gender norms at the top of my head. So I don't know if I had mentioned this last year, Julia, when we were working together, but I'm a trans guy. And so something that I always think about is like, I was working on my truck this weekend and I was like, I'm so glad that I know what I'm doing, but I only know what I'm doing because I was forced to watch, because I was forced to hold the flashlight like that. As you know, being raised as a young girl, that was the only thing I could do. I couldn't like touch the vehicle. I couldn't even retrieve the tools. It was flashlight duty. Like that was as close as I could get. And just, again, like, these are just kind of like unspoken norms, right? Of like behavior. It wasn't like, as my daughter, you need to blah, blah, blah. It was just like, nope, nope, this is for me to do. You can hold the flashlight. So I just think about those like scripted things that sneak in.
Absolutely. Now, I'm just curious, and thank you for sharing that, Kaden. So now that person, whoever that was kind of teaching you or having you hold the flashlight, how do they respond now? Are you more involved and fixing cars and trucks with that person, or, you know, how has that evolved? I'm just curious.
It's interesting. I think it's my dad, and I think me being trans has really thrown him for a whirlwind. Kind of like if you are a man, like what does that make me? Kind of that's my perception, because he's kind of ramped up some of these other like traditionally like masculine behaviors over the years. But I do get to touch the tools now, so I mean that has improved. Progression.
That's all we can hope for. And that's a conversation we've been having in my household lately too, because my husband works in a middle school and he keeps saying to me, I need to talk to Emily, because he's struggling with that a little bit. And I'm just happy that he's willing to learn and evolve and have the conversation, you know, how to address middle schoolers when they are really starting to self-identify, which is very common in middle school. I don't know what your experience was, but just what we know about developmental, that's when they're starting to express themselves a little bit more. So anyway, so I've been talking about that with my husband too. So.
And I think we're not equipped as a school districts. I just have a conversation with one, it's just an authority, but just more like advocate, and we're not equipped. But we're talking about infrastructure like locker rooms, restrooms, and scheduling, and we still have a good, we still have to do a lot more for the teachers. The teachers feel uncomfortable just asking for pronouns or for names. We have one student that has a transitional name, which he was transitioned, but they don't know, should I use they, should I use he? And it's like, ask them, right? Ask them, but they feel that they don't have, what if that, because we have a lot of students that will use their name that what they identify with here at the school, but not at home. So there's so much, and the teachers are scared. So because they don't have enough information, and they will get the pushback from parents. So it's just how we support the teachers to support our students, right? We have just this conversation like just before coming here. Okay, I think it's 5 minutes. So we get them back. Julia, do you wanna, I'm like,
You can ask them to share.
oh, okay.
And then whenever you wrap up, then it's you switch to me.
I'm sure the conversations are good because they're not coming.
They must be very good, Rocio, because some people are really lingering. So that's wonderful.
It's always a good sign.
2:25. It's 12:25. And we are in the first 5 slides.
We have everyone back now, I believe.
Oh, perfect. I can't, let me. Okay, great. Okay, now we are gonna, just a couple of pairs or groups to share their conversations if you want. We're in a safe space. Again, this is a brave space because sometimes when we're talking about this topics, it's more just to be brave and share that to be safe. Safe is not enough. We have to be brave. So if we'll love to hear for a team, a person, and we'll move on with our presentation. So we'll open the space.
Could we maybe put the reflection question in the chat for folks as a reminder quick?
Yeah, and it's it's not a specific question. It's just about more of like the conclusions of the conversations. I think that the idea was to share some of, similarities of differences in between that 10% and that 90% of the invisible, difficult to see elements of the culture. But I think at the end, what we want to hear is, the conversations that were going on. So it doesn't have to be an answer to the question, but it's just more of something interesting to the conversation. And I think I can start sharing something, and then we'll what everybody's processing. And it has to do a lot with culture, but also microaggressions or biases that we have. We're going to talk a little about that later in presentation. But for me, the way that I see in my country, how I look, the color of my hair, my skin will give me a certain status in society. And it changed extremely. It was the opposite here in the United States. So when I came from Peru, it was a cultural shock for me, because how people see me different. In Peru, people will see me as an educated, middle-class woman. And here I was more like see as an immigrant, an educated person, and it was just a stereotype that they have. So sometimes going, and I was processing why I always need to be well-dressed, right? This is something that I have to do it. And it was the times that I have not been well-dressed, like my hair is not ready, I get a totally different treatment than when I am with my professional clothes. So it's just how people see me that not also generate a lot of insecurities, but it's just how people here in the United States see me different than when people in my country see me. So it could be a stereotype, it could be some cultural difference, but again, it's just all together in how the perception of people that we have, it's also something that it's the cultural information that we have and we have learned over time.
So maybe if anybody wants to share, they can raise their hand, or we could just move on.
Okay, let's move on then.
Sounds good. Now we're going to get into the evolution of culturally relevant education. So we're going to talk about culturally responsive pedagogy, culturally relevant teaching, and culturally sustaining pedagogy, and how they build upon each other. So starting with culturally responsive teaching, that culturally responsive teaching refers to the culture of students. So sometimes we think about this, you may be familiar with the terms of windows and mirrors. So it's really the learning environment, the materials that are being used, the approach we take really reflects as a mirror of the student's culture with culturally responsive teaching. So culturally responsive teaching recognizes and respects and uses culture in meaningful ways for students. So we have a quote here from Gloria Ladstone-Billings. And Gloria Ladstone-Billings also coined the term culturally relevant pedagogy. And so culturally relevant pedagogy is a next step, and it takes the student's heritage and community and cultural practices as a resource to honor and explore. Culturally relevant pedagogy uses culture as a vehicle in all aspects of teaching. So you're teaching to and through the strengths of the students. Now, those ideas and ideals were used to then move on to most recently culturally sustaining pedagogy. So it's taking what we know about responsive teaching practices and relevant teaching practices and just one step further. Django Paris has written quite a bit about culturally sustaining pedagogies, and Sammy Ullum. And I'm going to present to you this quote. I'm not going to read it to you, but just as a point of reflection. So basically, the idea behind culturally sustaining pedagogy is so that culture is no longer eradicated by institutions and education. So we want to provide you with a time to reflect, and if there's anything that has resonated with you, we welcome you to tweet one idea, and you can at Rocio and I'm at Cloat Julia, and Rocio is at rpd.castillo. And feel free to tweet anything that has resonated with you so far in our presentation. Now we're going to move on to Wisconsin's model to inform culturally responsive practices. Now, working under the assumption that some of you are probably familiar with this model, we're going to just talk briefly about this framework with the desire to lead, and then that need to gain cultural knowledge, and also the skill to apply knowledge. So when we were reviewing this framework, we noticed that when you look at this framework as an overarching principles, the Illinois also has some culturally responsive practices as standards that were adopted last year, and they align quite nicely with the Wisconsin standards. So Rocio and I went ahead, and we're going to be talking in just a moment about the Wisconsin framework and alignment with the Illinois standards, but a few key pieces that really spoke to us from the Wisconsin framework about asset-based mindset in your pedagogy is to reflect on the fact that schooling without culturally responsive practices diminishes the ability of diverse students, and that learning environments should be welcoming places to students and their families, and that culturally responsiveness taps into perhaps the most underutilized asset of our schools, our students, our families, and ourselves. So this idea that when we really explore the cultures of our students and their families, that we have more, we can use that as a resource in our teaching and in our learning environments.
So we're going to start with the wheel, and it's the desire to lead. And the three components that become self-aware, examine systems that impact the family and students, and believe all students will learn. Talk a lot about, the expectations that as educators we have in our students. We'll talk later in this presentation about family, the concept of family engagement and how it's different in different cultures. But we're going to talk a little about now, so how do we become self-aware? Just a couple of things about the model, the Wisconsin model. I like that it's a circle, and how the arrows illustrate the ongoing and finished nature of this work, right? This work is never finished because we as people, we evolve. Our systems of belief can change over time. So I like this representation that Wisconsin have of the ongoing and finished nature of the diversity work, equity work, inclusion work, and at the same time, how to use this in our classrooms. So we kind of pick one big topic for each of these, the components of the framework. And we want to talk a little about bias. And we know about it, what is a bias. I'm not going to read the definition, but just to, when we start our self-reflection, it's good for us to have the same language. What's a bias and the type of biases that we can have. There's conscious bias, that is the explicit one, and unconscious bias, that is the implicit. So what are unconscious bias? And it's, we all have unconscious bias. We all do. If we don't know, there's a problem in our self-reflection part of our lives, right? We all form stereotypical associations and make, it's inaccurate judgments, but it's more like partial, right? We take one situation or one event and then we form an opinion without having the whole understanding of the situation. There's one TED Talk that, Julia, we can probably put in there in the single story one, that it's very powerful explanation that how we're not a single story, right? If I say I'm Peruvian, I have a single story of what happened in Peru. But if I say I'm an English learner, the people had a stereotype of about English learners, about immigrants, right? If you put all together that I'm an immigrant, I'm an English learner, but I'm a doctor and I'm a mom and I'm a consultant and I'm like a teacher, that all together is what make me who I am. So, but if you take all of this independently, that's just a single story of me. And that's when prejudice and stereotypes happen. So where do we start, right? It's just assess your personal bias. And I think we know that we need to do that. Yes, that's it. That's the one, Kaiden. So it's definitely, the journey is a change that is an inside out process, right? We first start with ourselves as teachers, and then we can understand other people, right? And because we do have assumptions about ourselves too. We have assumptions about others, but we have assumptions about ourselves. There's a project Implicit, and it was in collaboration with Harvard University. They have a test, basically a test about, they have race, they have gender, they have it's a survey, it's a yes and no, and it's time. So you have to respond really fast, and it's an eye-opening, even for me, like the stereotypes that I have, with white people, with people from other countries. It was very powerful because I thought I didn't have that many, and I did. So where to start? Definitely. And Julia and we wrote an article. We wrote a chapter for a book. It's for teachers, and it's to start with you. The process that starts with you will get into understanding the students, and not see your students as a single story, but see your students as who they are, and bring the whole identities and intersectionalities into understanding them.
So now I'm going to talk a little bit about Phil, which is gaining your information about your students. And the part of this that I found the most compelling, in the Wisconsin framework, it talks about understanding we all have unique identities and worldviews. And we align that with the Illinois standard that says that we understand and value the notion that multiple lived experience exists, and that there's not one correct way to do something. So to me, in my role in a K-12 environment, the clearest example I think of when I think about this is this idea of one correct way of doing things is you wearing hoodies. So our high school and middle school teachers often will write up students, punish students for wearing a hood. And when I think about that, and I think about that, the majority of in our global society, the majority of cultures have some type of head covering. And so there's, for some reason in our public schools, there's this idea that head coverings are wrong. And we're taking that idea that there's one cultural standard that we should be following, which is actually not true at all, and has some, there's some implicit bias that I think is demonstrated through penalizing young students for wearing hoodies. And also, the next thing in the Wisconsin framework is talking about knowing the communities. And there are many ways to do this. Like Rocio said, we wrote an article about how to do this, how new teachers can get to know their students. This idea of funds of knowledge where families and communities bring with them deep understandings. And if you get to know your students and their families, you can start to tap into the funds of knowledge and bring that in to your learning environment and really use that as a resource and for engagement and learning. You can do everything from just talking with the students. You can do interest inventories, conferring with them. There's a host of ways to do it. I like to simply, have with my students at NIU, I get to know them throughout the semester, talking to them about their experiences. I teach curriculum and instruction to future and current educators. So because they went into education, they probably had a good experience to share. And so tapping into that common value that we have, that shared value, I really learn a lot about them. I ask about what was it that really spoke to you? What was that teacher that reached out to you? And then we get to know each other from there, learning about what they value. And engaging with students and their families will just help you get a more holistic understanding of their lived experiences and will help you reach them and, help you advance their learning and their experiences. We also want to make sure that we're reaching out to families and providing information in ways that is meaningful to them. So Rocio said she's an expert on family engagement. One thing I often hear is our white educators saying things like, well, the families are just not engaged. But we need to be reflecting on what does engagement look like in their culture and in their family. Oftentimes they won't want to, they don't want us to be seen as questioning the teacher. So we need to be reflecting on that too. So far, what do we know is that culturally responsive pedagogy looks like representing and validating the cultures of all students. So in Freeport, where I work full-time, we have 47% of our students are white, and that is very misaligned with our teaching population. About 75% of our teachers are white. And so we really need to be mindful as a white educator. I really need to be mindful of how I'm reaching students. So just some points to reflect on is, number one, trusting marginalized people. One example that readily came to my mind was last week. One of my students, an undergrad at NIU, came to me and I had asked them to do a group project. The other students in her group did not invite her to a collaboration time. And she said, Dr. Cloat, my voice isn't being heard in this group. She was feeling that she was being diminished by her white colleagues. And so, I listened to her, took the time, we talked about next steps, and I just listened to her and valued, and I was so honored that she felt comfortable enough to come to me. She is a English multilingual learner. And so I had, we already had established a relationship, I knew that words weren't enough. So I had reached out to her. I'd asked her some advice about something I'd written about multilingual learners. And we had that respectful relationship so that she could tell me when she was feeling marginalized. One thing I also highly recommend is and that we are tasked with is confronting fellow white people. Just at a setting yesterday, I was with fellow superintendents. There were only 2 people of color in the room, and there was vast majority were white men. And they were talking about some of the cultural issues that are being brought to our school boards and to our into our public school settings. And I felt the need to stand up to my white colleagues and talk about, transgender issues and race issues and all of these things that even sex education, which are being brought to our school boards. And I had some uncomfortable conversations in that setting. Being fairly new to the area, I still had to put myself out there and speak up, but also know when to be quiet. Because I am white and I am in a position of power in my school district, I have to know when to just listen. I listened to the parents, I listened to the staff, I listened to the teachers, and I listened to my administrative colleagues. We're fortunate that equity is always a part of the daily conversation in Freeport. So I do more listening than I do talking normally in this setting. So that is really something that I need to be mindful of. Emily, do you have a reminder for us?
Oh, no, I was just clapping.
And Rocio, I think you're going to talk about skill.
So a skill is applying the knowledge and leading the changes skillfully, putting beliefs and learning into action. I think we can talk, and probably Julia say a lot of the information here. We can talk and we can discuss, but there's a moment when we have to have equity in action, right? And we can lead, we can model, we can advocate, but we also need to move to the action piece. And I think in our schools districts, at least, the action for us is when all our ideas are transferred to policies. Policies are the things that are going to change the reality of our institutions. So that's the first idea. And use practice and curriculum that respects student cultures. We can talk because Julia was speaking about how there's no one culture or there's not the right thing of how we approach to our reality. But if we look at history and we look in, what was the point of view? Is always the point of view. It's a very white and the people in power, right? So how that is changing, and it's changing in many school districts, right? How we put other voices of minorities or marginalized groups in the curriculum, how our kids get reflected in the curriculum. That's a different conversation, but there's ways that we can do that our kids feel not only respected, but that we embrace the different aspects of the identity of our students in the curriculum.
So we do want to sum it up, and then we can have some time for questions or engagement. But the image in the corner, by the way, is the New Teacher's Guide to Overcoming Coming Challenges. And so if you are teaching new teachers or are a new teacher, you may want to look into this book. We do have a section in there in overcoming bias and getting to know your students. But just to sum up our presentation today is viewing the diversity in thought, culture, and traits that your students and teachers bring to your school as an asset and not something that has to be overcome. And then to take a hard look at your personal bias. And as Rocio said, we all have those, and And what we need to do is just take that time to reflect, and to simply get to know your students and their families. And we do want to thank you and welcome anyone to reach out to us. I believe we have a few minutes for questions too. But here is our contact information. Rocio can be reached as her Twitter handle is RPD del Castillo, and mine is at Julia Cloat. And we welcome any questions that you have for us. Emily, do we want them to raise their hand or put it in the chat?
I think whatever you're comfortable with, if you are comfortable unmuting yourselves, raising your hand, or putting your questions in the chat, either format is good with us.
Kaden, are you the one who said that you don't have a Twitter?
I don't. I'm way behind the times, I think.
I don't either.
We do find it very valuable for education related.
Yeah,
I
it's like
find
a
it
good
very,
professional development tool. We use it a lot here. I don't have a Twitter.
I did have a question for you all. I know that obviously educators in every setting feel very burnt out and overwhelmed. So how do you both respond if you get pushback such as, this feels like one more thing, how could I possibly be responsive to the different needs of all of my students that I serve? How do you reframe that or respond to folks that maybe feel overwhelmed by this?
I just have this it's a real issue. And because we this year we give professional development to all our certified staff and not certified staff. So teachers, paraprofessionals, bus driver, food people, cafeteria, everybody on equity, right? So because of this year and how difficult it was, they feel that it was another thing, right? Another thing that they have to attend and they have to do. And this year it was more the foundation so the whole district can have the same language, and all our thousands of teachers, I don't know how many teachers we have really, but to have the same language. But they still were looking at it like a silo, like equity as a silo, as another thing. So what we did release a strategic effort in bringing this is not a silo professional development. This should be our foundation, and it should be embedded in how we teach in the curriculum, in our tier 1, how we teach in an SEL, in our discipline, in our access to, advanced classes. So this is the foundation. It's not just a professional development. It's how we operate and how we see students, because you cannot teach if you don't know your students. So getting to know your student is, for us, the first step. And giving the flexibility to teachers to say, hey, if you need that time, that math or literacy time to get to know your students, you have it. As an administrator, is giving that flexibility to teachers, right? Because I think you're going to be a better teacher if you know your students, and you're going to have more impact in them. So it's just giving that flexibility to teachers and helping them understand that this is a foundational piece of who we are, more than another professional development in a silo.
I agree. And it seems counterintuitive, but sometimes not saying equity. So if you're saying getting to know your students as people, obviously that is just the undercurrent of being equitable for them. But if you don't say that term, sometimes it's and you just make sure that that's the groundwork of everything you do. So. And
I think it's important the why. I think we all as teachers want what is the best for our kids. 99.9% of teachers, the others are too tired or they are like burnout, but every teacher wants what is the best for our students. I really believe that, and knowing the why and how it's gonna impact this student's life, I think it's the starting point.
Ilona has her hand up.
Thank you. I just wanted to, so I work in marketing communications, but I live in DC and I teach creative writing here, and I work with a lot of people from a lot of different places. But I really want to thank you both for one, sharing your personal stories and backgrounds and like the challenges that you've sort of have experienced, but two, like introducing this idea of bravery into it. That's like a really nice term that I think I'm going to use more often. Like I taught a writing class on like why color blindness is not appropriate or helpful or nourishing for anyone. But the idea of like bravery, like color bravery is just really special. And I think it's just what is needed, right? Like, yes, it's uncomfortable. It is. And so like, how do we move past the discomfort and like jump into it? So I'm going to be using that a lot. So thank you.
Thank you. That's awesome to hear. It's just so important because even for me being a person of color, if you say you're blind and you're not seeing this, you're taking away my lived experience and who I am, right? So we'll rather have this brave conversation now and get, to know each other than take away how hard it was being, a person of color, being a woman, being like, let's talk about this in a safe or brave space. So yeah, you make my day, Wilana. Thank you very much.
Anyone else would like to share or questions? We welcome you to raise your hand or unmute, whatever you're comfortable with. Well, we want to thank everyone for attending, and I believe that Kaden is going to help us out and put some posts of some articles and blog posts and some other links that we have to share, as well as some resources from our presentation. We appreciate your support with that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you both for being here.
Okay.
Yeah, please join us tonight for our next virtual session starting at 6 p.m. And I welcome you all to have a great afternoon. Thank you both again for a great presentation.